Hey everyone, it's Raghu Markus, and I'm back with Mindrolling, and I'm here with an old friend, Zach Leary. Zach, welcome.
Raghu, Ram, good to see you.
Great to see you as well. So we have some stuff to talk about.
Okay.
We want to mention, of course, Zach has a new book. It's going to come out next month, right? No, shortly.
April 29th and sounds true. It's called Your Extraordinary Mind, Psychedelics in the 21st Century and How to Use Them.
Yeah, no, there's some great information in the book that's certainly appropriate for anyone thinking of delving into that area. What prompted you? I mean, it's kind of a silly question since your father is Tim Leary, but what did prompt you to put this together after all these years?
Yeah, after all of these years. Well, look, I mean, there were a few different ways to answer that for sure. One, I can be the very kind of human pragmatic answer, Raghu, is sort of like, well, that was the next thing that I needed to do. That was kind of the next logical step for this place that I occupy in the psychedelic community as a facilitator or a teacher. I do all these things. So there's that. But, honestly, the more important part is, I knew I had a book in me for quite some time. And actually the first kind of inklings of it when I was living in Maui and living close to RD. And I started putting things down on paper, but I wasn't able to really coalesce the idea for quite some time. And, about 4 years ago, I put together this book proposal. I just was, being an observer in the psychedelic community and seeing this new kind of explosion of psychedelic use. I see a lot of things that I think are going well, and I see a lot of things that to me are, I wouldn't call them red flags, but I'd call them yellow flags, things I think we could do better and that are trends that aren't necessarily a great thing. So I wanted to get that down on paper, and I came up with this book proposal, and here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Here and now.
Here and now. Yeah. But I must say that the manifestation of it, I wrote this book proposal in 3 days, and it's a kind of a funny story of purpose and dharma. I wrote this book proposal in 3 days. I sold it a week later. So it went from idea to selling it to Sounds True in 10 days. And I was like, oh, wow, it's so easy to write a book. I can do this. And I got my ass handed to me. It was really hard. And then it took another 3 years to do it. But
that's the usual around it. That is it. Yeah. But I want everybody, of course, Zach has this storied history because of his family and because of Ram Dass as well. And it's interesting because when Zach was young, Ram Dass was part of his life. I mean, real young. Yeah. And so how about some history, your personal history? People really want to know, what the heck was it like growing up in that environment with Tim and,
Oh, well, I mean, it's sort of like this beautiful, I look back on it, and it's, I'm over 50 now. So,
that's staggering too, since I've known you.
I know, right? And Timothy died when I was 22. So, I kind of look back on it now. It's almost like Christian Das would say, like this movie of me, and I see it and I know I lived it, but it kind of feels sort of like this distant sort of other character that I'm observing. But, on the kind of more kind of touchy-feely family side, the great thing about growing up with Timothy in that phase of his life was, he had two older children who, he didn't do a very good job with. And that's not just me saying that. He would have said that too. It's not slander or anything. It's well known. And he kind of feels like he failed them. And so when I came around, it kind of felt like he felt like, oh, I get a chance to do this over again, and I'm going to be a great dad. I'm going to take him to baseball practice. I'm going to take him to Little League and drop him off at school, and do his carpool shifts and make sure he does his homework. So there was that, and I do look back on that fondly. And as far as the rest goes, just being in this environment that was so rich with some of the great minds of the 20th century, thinkers, spiritual teachers, artists, rock stars, philosophers, and everyone else in between, was certainly a unique way to grow up. I had access, which I'm very grateful for. The downside of that is when you're young, you don't really know what to do with it. You're going to take it for granted. You think, oh, that's just how the world is. And then I realized in my mid-20s, oh, that's not how the world is. And that was a rude awakening. So it's a mixed bag, man. It's a mixed bag. I'm certainly grateful for that I got to spend part of my incarnation in that swarm of this beautiful kind of unfolding kind of chaos magic philosophy that was the Timothy Leary experience. The cons, of course, are, a lot of personal demons that I had to reckon with, and finding my own voice and finding my own path, which was hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you experiment with psychedelics while he was still alive?
Absolutely. Yeah. I started, and I want to put this out there too, and I do talk about this in the book. When I started around age 15, I was following the Grateful Dead around, and contrary to popular opinion, it was not okay with either of my parents. They were, Timmy sat me down and said, Zach, you're too young. These are very powerful tools. You have to wait till your brain is fully developed. And he really gave me a cautionary, like the first talk about it was very much a cautionary tale. It was not like, oh, here's what set and setting is about and go forth. And of course I didn't listen. And then when I was, as I started to get a little bit older, he sort of flipped the script and kind of turned it into more of like a harm reduction. Well, he's doing it anyway. So I might as well support him and show him how to do it, and had some great experiences with him.
Really?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And
can you in any way remember and describe one of them?
Oh my God, yeah. Well, I could talk about, and here's a good story for your listeners. The same went with cannabis as well. I started smoking at a young age, and my parents, Zach, you're too young. And one weekend, Ramdas came to stay at the house. My mom was away on a vacation, and Ramdas was staying in the guest room, and it was just me and Timmy and Ramdas, and we're sitting around the fire, and Ramdas breaks out a joint, and he told Timmy, it's okay. Let's let him in. It'll be okay. And it was the first time that I ever got to smoke with my dad, was because of Ramdas. And then the story gets a little ironic, and it happened to be the next morning was the last day of junior high school, the last day of 9th grade, and I wake up to go to school, and there's half a joint left in the ashtray. So I take it to school, and I thought, oh, it's the last day of school, what could go wrong? I don't know. And I take it to school, and I, on the corner of the playground, I smoke with a friend of mine, and we get busted. On the last day of school, we get busted. And Ramdas had left, so Timothy had to come pick me up from school, and we just had this silent, very awkward ride home. And I just it was just channeling through my veins, like, wow, I blew it. RD gave me this beautiful opportunity to finally share this with my dad, and I blew it. Damn. There's some other good psychedelic stories. There's Pink Floyd on acid in 1994 at the Rose Bowl, and there's several, but I look back on them incredibly fondly. He was a great mentor in a way, though. He was really As far as psychedelics went, I mean, he had his share of recreational drugs and drinking, no question, but he was very intentional and very observant and very deliberate about his psychedelic use, and did not use it flipping. He was not flippant about it at all. And that really translated well.
I don't know if you call flippant at Millbrook going into a little room for a week with as much psychedelics as you could possibly even carry in, and never mind taking everything every day. But apparently, what I understood, you can corroborate this, is that Ram Dass was like the nuttier guy in this whole scene in terms of taking anything, anytime, any kind of dose.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's true. That's how I interpret the story as well.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, though, Ram Dass, well, he was Richard back then. Yeah. That's true. He was kind of the human guinea pig, but at the same time, he was also the one keeping it together. He was the one paying the bills, making sure that the laundry got done, while Crazy Tim was out there being Crazy Tim. So somehow I think Richard knew how to keep it all together.
It's kind of a combo.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, what a combo!
Oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't. I only went to Millbrook to visit it for my first time only about 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And I happened to be in the neighborhood, and the Hitchcocks and the Guinnesses still own it. And I called up Peggy Guinness and said, "Wow, can I get a tour?" And it was the first time I had been, and oh wow, it just was so extraordinary to go inside the main house and go to the famous gatehouse where Richard was living the winter before he became Ram Dass, and to kind of take it all in. It was just extraordinary. I really felt the energy.
You should have shot some video or something.
Yeah.
Good. And then the people, as you said, all of these incredible people, personalities and philosophers and writers and teachers and whatever that would be in the midst of all this. And I don't know why, I guess because he's Canadian and I'm Canadian. Maynard Ferguson was a major personality in that time, right?
Yeah. Maynard is Canadian.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, everybody, one of the great trumpet players in jazz, and a big psychonaut apparently as well.
Yeah, he spent some quality time at Millbrook, and so did some other jazz heavyweights too. Herbie Hancock, Charlie Mingus. They stopped by to. I think between 63 and 66, when Millbrook was still really this amazing kind of utopian idea, and then I think by late 66 it was kind of starting to fall apart after the first G. Gordon Liddy bust, and then things were getting a little out of control. But there was a sweet spot there where it sounded like a pretty cool scene.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Not to mention, I mean, Terence McKenna and John Lilly, particularly in terms of my own connectivity. Not so much, I never met either of them, but just in terms of getting exposed to them really through Ram Dass.
Yeah.
Do you have recollections of them or?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Especially Dr. John, John lived in Los Angeles. And which is a kind of an interesting historical footnote for psychedelic historians. Los Angeles has a really interesting footprint for early psychedelic research. Humphrey Osmond, who coined the term psychedelic, lived in LA and worked at UCLA. Aldous Huxley lived and died in Los Angeles. Dr. John Lilly, of course, Timothy, Oz Janiger, all these great kind of psychedelic heavyweights. We used to spend a lot of time at John's kind of compound in Malibu, where he was doing his kind of dolphin communication research and invented the flotation tank, and then started getting into ketamine, which kind of went a few different directions.
It did.
It did. But then, John moved to Maui. He kind of set the path for RD. He moved to Maui, about a decade before RD. But yeah.
No.
And Terrence as well. Terrence wasn't around as much. But my recollections of Terrence are very kind of similar to what they were of Ram Dass when I was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and when I was a teenager, like those kinds of guys, they'd freak me out. Like RD. Like when I was a teenager, like RD is just that beam of love and that kind of glow and presence that he had when you're a mixed up teenager searching for who you are. That was it's kind of a heavy thing to be around. I'm like,
oh yeah,
is this guy full of shit? I don't know what's going on. Is this real? And it was a tough hang for sure. And to Terrence too, because that gift of oratory that he had, but he was lovely. He was just so kind.
Yeah. I'm thinking of in the book. I don't know if you could find if you even have the book by you, but there's such a great thing about Aldous Huxley, and of course, somebody else I never met, but I know through Ram Dass, who was quite close to Aldous and Laura subsequently. Yeah. So there, I think there's it's his wife talking about. So I knew from Ram Dass that when he was dying, he took a lot of acid. Ram Dass used to tell me stories, or not me, us. This was in India, way back in the day. We were together, supposedly doing a meditation course, and the teacher never came. That's a whole other story. But maharaj-ji basically got rid of it. He's always trying to get rid of us. And so Ram Dass used to regale us at night. It was nothing. We had no power, no nothing. We had to go down a deep slope to get water to survive, no bathrooms. It was really primitive. But these stories, were fantastic. And the one I remember particularly is at the end of his life, Huxley walking around. I think Ram Dass was there. And he got to the point where he couldn't really talk a lot, which happens when you're getting closer to the transition, and certainly when you're on acid. And all he could do, Ram Dass said, he would just look around, and with these wide eyes, extraordinary, everything became that pinnacle of the essence of the moment that Ram Dass, of course, talked about through Be Here Now and all that. But I love that. But she tells a story. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the story she tells about Aldous taking what happened to him through that last?
Yeah, absolutely. On the day Aldous died, he insisted on taking LSD, and Laura gave it to him. And side note, he died the same day JFK was assassinated.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, and they were living up in Laurel Canyon. And there's a beautiful book, and I quote kind of part of the passage of it in my book in the Death and Dying chapter. But there's a beautiful book called This Timeless Moment, written by Laura, which is about death and dying, but it's about her life with Aldous. And there's just a tremendous kind of moment by moment recount of the last hours of Aldous as he was transitioning, and also being high on LSD, and how the acid really helped him to drop his ego and move towards the light. And in the story, you'll hear Laura just kind of saying, "Go closer to the light, go to the light, go closer to the light." And it's this really beautiful. And when you read it, there's almost sort of like this quiet tension to it, because, he's going on his last breaths and just, really just about to leave his body. But at the same time, the LSD experience is kind of sucking him back in, then back out, then back in. And it's extraordinary. And what's also, if anybody wants to seek it out, at the very first MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference in 1992 in Berkeley, California. I was there. I was Tim's driver at the Claremont Hotel. RD was there. Laura was there. Timothy was there. And Laura and RD read A Timeless Moment together on stage.
The whole book?
No, just not the whole book. The chapter of the
that chapter.
Yeah. And the recording can be found. It's at Sound Photosynthesis at that website, that archival website.
Okay, everybody, wait, we're going to stop here because first of all, we want to give people a link to Laura's book. So the producers that are producing this, and then you'll send an email with that link to that. That's a valuable thing. I want to hear it, You
guys should put it out on the Ramdas, the
podcast.
The podcast. It's an extraordinary moment. Really beautiful. Yeah. And they're just kind of taking turns. I don't know if they were alternating chapters or verses or something, but Laura and RD just kind of riffing off each other. And it's just so beautiful.
Wow.
And the reason I put it in my book is because, in recent years, there's been some really great formal research done on the benefit of using psilocybin to ease end-of-life transitioning. Mm-hmm. And the success rates are, really beautiful and really amazing high efficacy and loss of anxiety and, things like that. And I thought it's the great example of how to do that. And, Timothy thought he was going to do it. We thought it was going to be a good idea, but he was too kind of frail and sick for us to follow through.
Well, that's the other issue. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
definitely. So, you talk a little bit about sort of absorbing these two personalities, Tim Leary and Richard Alpert Ramdas, in a way that you felt completely enhanced your own life trip. Why don't you talk about that? Because that's interesting, because, many people, of course, Tim was a real thinker, a real intellect, and he went into a different space than Ramdas did. Ramdas was all about heart, although he was an intellect as well, or none of this stuff would have happened without that kind of acumen.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Ramdas was... in some ways, it's kind of feels funny for me to say this, but Ramdas is kind of the best of both worlds. He took the best of Tim. He was just a fantastic thinker and really, a first-rate mind, but then kind of fused it together with the heart and spirit. And I mean, I do really relish and, feel incredibly grateful and inspired by Timothy's kind of ever-quenching thirst of being curious. He was so, and, again, it was one of those things I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back on it, I mean, he was perpetually curious and always learning and always reading and had this work ethic that was just, I've never seen anybody have had a work ethic like that. That. Always at his desk and working and putting ideas on paper and having this self-awareness that he was doing this important work and it had to be archived and documented and this constant need to reinvent himself and never kind of falling back on the greatest hits. And, if anybody came up to him out in public and said, "Hey, Timothy, tune in, turn on, drop out," he'd be like, "Fuck you, man. Come on, get with it. It's the 90s, And, and he was... And just really, this kind of expertise and knack that he had to reinvent what he was into and what his work was about was, really, I think he goes down as one of the great philosophers of the 20th century. And I look back on that and with a tremendous amount of fondness and inspiration as well. And I would sort of add to that, I did know early on that I sort of had a spiritual inclination that felt a little untapped, my house wasn't really about that, I was turned on to RD's work as a teenager and reading some of his books. And at the same time, I also, when I was about 16, 17, got turned on to the ISKCON movement and sort of was like, oh, what is this? This feels good. I don't know if I want to join, but this feels good. Whatever this is, this bhakti yoga thing feels pretty cool. But I didn't have the discipline to develop any kind of practice. So I think it nudged itself in my heart, but never really took form until, that November 2008 trip to Maui, when I hadn't seen RD in it had been 5 years since I had seen him, and I was doing a lot of yoga and meditation. And I was like, I need to go visit RD. It'd been a few years since I'd seen him, and that trip to Maui Raghu just changed everything. I just saw him in a different light for the first time. I guess suddenly I was ready. Mm. Suddenly he was ready to be ready. That I was ready, and it just was just a different thing. It was like meeting Maharaj-ji and Ram Dass's kind of continuation of that for the first time, and up until that point, it was kind of just this intellectual curiosity, but something changed on that trip. And like I was saying earlier, a huge, like my kind of struggles and, personal kind of demons had so much to do, or have so much to do with finding my own voice and not just kind of being the son of or anything, That's always been a difficult thing. And I've certainly, wore my mistakes on my sleeve pretty publicly and heavily. And it's been hard, but I think it's really RD's grace and Maharaj's grace that has kind of, reinforced the idea that, hey, I do have something to offer, and I have my own karma and dharmas to sort of bring to the world,
Yeah. Well, it's a good combo, no matter what.
I think so. I mean, I think they represent each other pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a film, by the way, everybody. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's quite lovely, with Tim Leary and Ram Dass at this point. Ram Dass went, Gay Dillingham, Dying to Know is the name of the film. There's a book that we did that came out last year that is transcripts and embellishments and pictures, a wonderful coffee table book as well. But the meeting of Ram Dass and Tim in that stage, which was close to death. I don't know. I think within months, he might have died.
6 months before.
Yeah, 6 months. Yeah. It's worth seeing. Just that part. The endearing, just the love that was shared between them. It's absolutely, completely visible, no matter what.
Yeah.
They went through in the previous 40 years or whatever it was. So, that's a beautiful thing. So,
such a great movie. I'm so fond of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you also talk a lot about, which the book's about psychedelics. So you put in a little bit about, okay, what's the history of psychedelics? And that's in there.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention something that I found out that I'm not sure, but you may know about. It's a book called Tripped by Norman Ohler from Frankfurt, Germany. No? Okay. I was wondering. You got to get this and you got to read this book. It's basically the origin of LSD.
Okay.
And how it, got into the culture. So it's so staggering. I don't know how many podcasts I've already taught. People are going to get bored, but you need to really get into this because it's just something beyond anything you could ever thought of. So Hoffman, after he developed acid, right? It belonged to Sandoz in Switzerland. Somehow, the Nazis in the early 40s got, 43, right after he discovered it, they got they got the knowledge that this was in existence, and they were looking for drugs to be able to get people to talk. That's truth drugs. That's what they thought it was.
Right.
And so they made a deal with Sandoz and got a bunch of acid. And they started, the horror of using the concentration camps to administrate it without anyone's knowledge so they could observe it. So this is what they did. War ends. Yeah. The war ends. And the CIA is in Germany, figuring out stuff. They hear about it.
Yeah.
And the man that they had put in charge in Germany, CIA, he went and made a deal with Sandoz, got a bunch of acid, and he started experimenting.
Yeah.
I'm talking, Zach, he would just throw acid into people's coffee.
Yeah,
and just watch them, see what happened.
The MK Ultra project,
Yeah, then they started going to universities, and they started, this was late 50s, or I think that's about the timing of it.
Mm-hmm. And
so this is where the story, when I read this, my eyes popped out. Yes, one of the universities the CIA used to experiment with people was at McGill University, which is the school in Montreal. That's like the Harvard of Canada. And they had a psychiatric institute called the Allen Memorial. And my mother was there in a deep depression she was dealing with, okay? And she was one of the informed participants. Now, I knew this because she told me a long time ago. I guess they finally found out in the school and apologized to the people, whatever. So I asked my mother, well, okay, what happened, after they gave you the pill? She said, oh, I felt wonderful. That didn't happen with everyone, that's for sure. Anyhow, can you imagine?
Oh my God!
This came from the Nazis to the CIA.
That is unbelievable. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, that's your mother's story. That's one of the success stories. Another one of them too was when they were MK Ultra was still that military program.
Yeah.
And they were doing it at Stanford, and Ken Kesey was an unknown recipient as well, but it lit him on fire, and he was like, wow, what is this?
Yeah.
And of course, Kesey went on to do what he did, but yeah, that's a really interesting story. Yeah. And I haven't read that book, but I'm pretty familiar with the history. It's a really sordid history. And if you look
to say the least,
and if you look at the details of especially MK Ultra and what they were doing on, oh my gosh, to politicians with their prostitutes and looking through the glass mirror on the other side of the wall and weird dingy hotel rooms. It was just really sadistic stuff, man.
Yeah.
Really terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it shows that LSD is not a successful mind control drug.
No, not at all. Not at all. Oh boy.
I think sort of the positive that did sort of come out of that was because, of these ill-fated, militarily led attempts to use LSD, it did make its way into the legitimate psychiatric community. And if it wasn't for MK Ultra, like Humphrey Osmond, who coined the term psychedelics and did, the first alcoholism studies with LSD in the 1950s, that wouldn't have happened. So, as a result, there is some really groundbreaking and still to this day, amazing legitimate LSD research that happened in the 50s, because that's where the tentacles went into the psychology and psychiatric communities. And it wasn't until 10 years later did it even make into the counterculture. So, I mean, not much good came of that, but there are a few little bright spots for sure,
Yeah. Well, listen, one thing we should speak to, and you should speak to it, is, of course, MAPS and Rick Doblin. And what he's done is extraordinary. And I say that in the same breath as my own personal belief and what, we represent through Ram Dass, his perspective on acid, the therapy part, the medical part.
Yeah.
I mean, what he's done is extraordinary, and for so many people. At the same time, I think if it just rests in that container, we're losing the mystical part. What do you think?
A little shaky if we just rest in that container, but I will say, and I am a friend of Rick's and a MAPS advocate. My podcast was the MAPS podcast for many years, and I have great admiration for the work that Rick has done and helping. I'd frame it this way, Raghu. It's like so much of, especially in the last 15 years of psychedelic research, has been a correction of the disinformation campaign of the previous 60 years. And it's an unraveling of all of this propaganda and disinformation and the war on drugs and all this kind of these weird pop culture sort of paranoia fantasies about psychedelics can do. And that's been really hard to course correct. And I think MAPS and their very kind of diligent and disciplined kind of fallback onto the research and onto data and onto set and setting and preparation and integration has really helped to change the minds of a lot of people whose minds needed changing. Like you and I our minds are already changing. Don't need changing, but other people who maybe are part of, the veterans community, law enforcement, politicians and scientists and the psychiatric community, I think, the MAPS-led research really helped to kind of redefine the modern age of psychedelics. And in conjunction with, assisted therapy while on the medicine can lead to, fantastic results. There's no question about that. And I will say, my only sort of cautionary tale around that is for people who are newer to the method of psychedelics. I don't want everyone to think that this belongs to white lab coats and sterile white rooms and therapists, because that sort of injects this air of sterility and lack of magic and mysticism to it, So there's pros and cons to the medicalized movement, but for the most part, I think it has helped to usher in a new era of psychedelic research, and at the same time, I see so many people discovering indigenous use of psychedelics and Ram Dass's use of perspective on psychedelics, and so there's room for everyone to kind of coexist. I just, one thing I do fear though is a psychedelic future that is overly regulated, overly prescribed, and overly prophetized on and exploited into. So we have a future that's.
This is America, eh?
This is America.
Oh, God, that just reminded me of Childish Gambino's video, This is America. Have you ever seen that?
Video. That's great. It's a great video. Powerful.
Really powerful.
Yeah.
Oh,
and today, God. I mean, gosh, that's a message we need more than ever. Jesus, no,
something else. We're talking about MAPS. There's one person who was involved, who's no longer with us, Roland Griffith. And I was at MAPS, I guess, 2 years ago, and saw him there. That's the only time I was with him physically. You knew him well?
Not well. No. I did not know him well. I did. I met him, but we did not have a relationship. But I'm a great admirer of him.
Yeah, me too, without having any personal relationship. And I guess I think you wrote about how, he was really denigrated.
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah, talk about that. I found that awful, actually, considering the warmth and humanity and caring, just meeting in person or being in the room with him. It's wow. What was that about?
Yeah, well, the thing about
wait, you should also, sorry to interrupt you, Zach. We should say who he is in the pantheon of
Roland Griffiths was the lead investigator and psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University for the psychedelic studies program at Hopkins. And when that started in 2001, and you got to look at it from a macro level, that's a really big deal. Johns Hopkins is the most prestigious medical institution in the West, pretty much. And Roland led the psychedelic studies investigation team there, which did landmark studies with psilocybin and treatment-resistant depression, kind of reinvestigations into the mystical experience in conjunction with meditation, smoking cessation, end-of-life anxiety. So many just landmark studies, which really, I think, helped to elevate this movement in an incredible way. But the interesting thing I think about Roland is that over the course of this work, he kind of became more of a mystic than he did a scientist in some way.
And that's what they're uptight about.
That's what they're uptight about. And like, I sort of was, as I was seeing him evolve, I was like, hey, this guy's kind of like, he's, as the saying goes, he's kind of like playing a doctor on TV, but he's really a mystic, and a first-rate scientist, no question. But, when the psilocybin treatment-resistant depression studies, he was really trying to inject the idea and the notion that, we don't have answers for all of the ways in which this works. We can certainly come up with a lot of data and create a lot of columns and data points and focus groups, but there's an unknown quotient to how psychedelics work in treating something like depression that we can't explain. And as a scientific community, we should embrace that. Like, there's a mystery to it. And through that process, he was really encouraging people to go within, to go deep. And that's what this is about. And then after he died, there were some of his colleagues at Hopkins kind of thought, that he was, that colored the data. That sort of, biased the data. If you're encouraging people to have a mystical experience, that somehow makes the data unsound because there's a predisposed cognitive bias for it. Yeah. But I think it's just the opposite. And I think it's very unfair that he was criticized in that way afterwards. And I think it's a very astute observation as a scientist to, that's the problem with so much modern psychedelic research is that it defaults to the scientific method, and anything that predates the scientific method or that can't fit into that sphere of explanation is somehow discounted. And that's a kind of the arrogance of the medical community. And I think Roland recognized that and did his best to, make the best of both worlds. So, yeah.
Similarly, though, this is something that was said about your father, about Tim.
Yeah. And
we got to clean up the mess, and Richard. They got to clean up the mess that they made.
I know. I mean, that I don't know, Raghu. At this point, like that to me, it's just like this trope that is just like that card has been played so many times, and oh goodness, I look. My eventual conclusion on that is that, it's so easy to Monday morning quarterback sort of what went wrong, but none of us have any idea of what it was like to be in the hot seat of the counterculture at the time and to go on the ride that he did. And I really think Timothy was doing the best that he could,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And he, yes, did he, when he got to be that famous, did he push it away? No, he didn't. He enjoyed it, but he didn't seek it. It just happened, and LSD was, the genie was let out of the bottle. And once that's out, you can't put it back in.
As Leonard Picard shared with us in Denver when we did that panel, boy, he really... talk about letting the genie out of the bottle.
Boy, did he.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Leonard Picard is this amazing man who was the biggest maker of LSD in the 90s. 90s,
80s and 90s.
80s and 90s. And he regaled us at this event that we did for Love Serve Remember Foundation.
Isn't he amazing, though? He's so amazing. God.
I mean, he did one thing. He did a lot of different things he shared a lot of different things. And one of them was the prayer that he used to recite when he with each batch that this guy, by the way, made millions of doses on a regular basis. So he would say a prayer, and he said the prayer in that moment. There's, I don't know, 350 people there. There was not. It's one of those. You could hear a pin drop. It was so. I mean, the way the room came together in this vibration of unity was something else. Yeah. So
and he's such this like he reminds me of sort of like a 1950s movie star. And kind of. He's tall and so handsome, and that gray hair, and so well spoken, and great looking, and and it's just he carries himself so well. And and his story is, he was, not to kind of overplay it, but he was really a martyr. I mean, he did 20 years prison time, and
hard time
in federal prison. Yeah. I always look at that as he did the time for us, and
he came out of it so whole. It's extraordinary when you just extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't seem too broken by it, and if he is, he's hiding.
No, I'm sure he's dealing with stuff. You can't go through that without trauma. But he's dealt with it appropriately, I believe. I think it was also he had this incredible good fortune of being in a Zen monastery before he went in. He had something to use to connect behind all of the stuff, and he did that. Not everybody can do that. He did that.
Yeah, and that reminds me, there's a great story of a Tibetan Rinpoche who was one of the freedom fighters for the Free Tibet movement, who was captured by the Chinese and put in prison, and he did 23 years time.
Garchen Rinpoche is his name.
Oh, okay.
Garchen. I actually, I've been with. I actually drove him. I was his driver once in Los Angeles to go to retreats back and forth where he was staying and so on.
And the great thing that he said when he was released from prison, when they asked him, what was your greatest fear of being in prison, and he said, my greatest fear was that I was going to lose compassion for my captors. Which is just an extraordinary.
These people are beyond the beyond, though. They're beyond, although because their training is just. From birth is something else. But then Leonard, hey, he's an exemplar of just a regular guy who got into psychedelics and then did what he did. He didn't have monk's training, although he had that little 2-3 year window or something where he did train, So practice is good no matter what, including, how you relate with using psychedelics for inner expansion.
I'd go so far as to say, Raghu, that not to be overly kind of judgmental, but it's even essential. I think I'd go so far as to say that. And, our guy RD is the best example of that, of how he embodied the psychedelic spirit after becoming Ram Dass, and that was due to the practice and maharaj-ji, and I see far more success in the psychedelic sphere with people who have something to augment the experience with. If you are going back to your desk on a Monday morning and just unaware of these transformations and not making any effort to tap in, it will fade. And so I think it's an essential ingredient that you need to make it successful.
Yeah, integration. Yeah, that's a whole part of what we talked about in Denver, actually.
Yeah.
Hey, there's something in the book that, I think it's worth sharing. And that was around the critical period. Talk about the critical period.
Well, there's a wonderful researcher named Gul Dolan who works out of Berkeley.
What's his name again?
Her name is Gul. Yeah, and it's a funny spelling, Guldolen, Gul Dolan. Huh. And she's a fantastic neuroscientist, and she's doing research on, so far there haven't been any human studies, but there have been, mammalian studies, animal studies on how psychedelics extend the critical period. And the critical period is basically our brain's capacity for neuroplasticity in learning a new task, a new skill or language. Like when we are children, our critical period, our brain is so malleable and so wide open to learn new things. So, when you're a little kid, you can learn a language much quicker. Or you can learn. A great example that I fall back on is you can learn classical piano. Like if you and I tried to go learn double staff classical piano right now, it's almost impossible. I mean, you maybe could learn, but you're not going to play Rachmaninoff. It's not going to happen. But what the research is showing is that psychedelics reignite our critical period. I mean, for a finite amount of time, anywhere from 48 to 2 days to 5 days. And during that time, the integration stage after the experience is when we can really take advantage of those downloads and change our behavior, learn new coping skills, learn new ways to increase our emotional intelligence, our resilience, or learn new creative skills, play your instrument, paint, or whatever it is, that is designed to help you do that, because the brain's kind of that little window of your neuroplasticity, atoms and all your brain cells being wide open to kind of to adapt to do something new. It's possible. It is really possible. So it's a really interesting way of looking at the benefits of the post psychedelic growth period, which, like we were talking about in Denver, which comes down to integration. But how you take advantage of that, I think, is the work.
Yeah, and the other thing to acknowledge, which you do, and which I was really happy to see in the book, is the trauma in all of us.
Yeah.
This is something that is across the board. There is nobody, including Ram Dass, who did not have to face that trauma, which causes the neurotic tendencies, the habitual patterns, and the reality of what you just discussed around the neuroplasticity and the ability that is endemic. It's possible. And that shines a light on, hey, these traumas that we have all gone through, some of us in a very fierce way. I mean, and, you in particular, you had to go through some extraordinary traumas, I would say mine weren't as deep as yours, but of course mine felt just like that, whenever I did go through them. But yeah, acknowledging that, I think, is super important in relation to when you embark on a psychedelic journey, acknowledging that. So I think the other therapy that is super important is dealing with the psychological stuff that has created these traumas.
Yeah.
Not be, you're not going to deal with it and then take a psychedelic like, okay, I've done that. That ain't going to happen. But I think it needs to be part of the whole of developing, the connectivity to that place which is behind trauma, which is, behind good and evil.
I mean, it's so well said. And, my perspective on this topic, was born out of personal experience. My, substance abuse and active addiction and been in recovery for a really long time, but I have relapsed and, experienced these just really, really awful traumatic experiences and personal violence upon me, being homeless, living in Skid Row, going to jail, and just really terrible things. And, the psychedelic experience in conjunction with a therapeutic support vessel is kind of gave me this kind of safety net, or this, I don't know, almost like this empathetic permission to want to explore that and to heal from that a little bit, and to understand, why I ran from it in the first place. And that's speaking for myself, but and then, and the others that I work with as a facilitator, that seems to be a really common thread. There's most people, not all, but most people who have PTSD spend a certain window of running from it, of being in denial about it, of not acknowledging it, whether that is an institution like the VA telling them, oh, you don't have PTSD, take these medications, or whether it's society or whatever it is, And then once you kind of get to that place of like, oh, okay, I'm prepared to face this, and my heart and soul, spirit, mind are in the right place to do so, the results can be very healing. Not easy, but rewarding. Yeah.
And everybody remember the importance of community. Satsang, sangha, however, what word you want to use, that kind of support. We are all in the same boat. I tell this story often also. I was with Ram Dass, and we were up in the Himalaya doing that meditation course. And we took over an ashram, maybe 20 of us at that moment. And each had a room. There was an upstairs and there was a downstairs. Ram Dass had one of the rooms. And he used to do the thing, which you're, I'm sure, familiar with, where you're absolutely 3 feet away, and he says, and looking in his eyes, and he goes, if there's anything that you're afraid to say it now, in one way or the other, right?
Yes, in one way or another.
Yeah. So people would do that, and then the issue was that this is India. They don't build, there's no insulations. Everybody on either side and below could hear what that person was going. Oh, Ram Dass, I want to make love to you, whatever, and we all looked at each other we all knew everybody's shtick, okay? And it was all, it's extraordinary. It was all.
That made you guys closer, right?
Yeah. Well, you couldn't get any closer sitting around maharaj-ji where you were like naked, okay? Everything was revealed in every moment. But in this case, we understood that we had some real issues around sex, because that seemed to be the main thing that came up. Tell me whatever it is you can't say it now. Blah, blah. Just blurting out one sexual fantasy over another. God knows what it was. And shame, And
why do you think that was? Was that because at that time, anyway, that the generational gap was still not really where it is today?
No, I think in the West we have shame around that subject, period, in one way or another. Some are a little bit more healthy, some are a little bit more weird, but basically we have shame. And that shame, causes this, this blanket around us that we are not going to reveal anything, any of those kind of innermost thoughts. So again, this is the benefit. Psychedelics can be beneficial in revealing this. We're okay. You're okay. We were fortunate to be with Neem Karoli Baba.
Yeah.
And, he would say shit that, he knew exactly what we were thinking about. So he was like, there was nowhere to go. Absolutely nowhere to go. And it was very, very refreshing, actually, it's okay if this being, whoever he might be, can still love us. Ram Dass had the experience of being with somebody in the satsang, another gay person, and they got it on, and the next day they went to see Maharaj-ji, from wherever they were staying. And Ram Dass is thinking, oh my God, he knows everything. I'm going to live through this. This is terrible. And he sat down, Maharaj-ji did. He points at the two of the Ram Dass and this other guy, and he goes, you two love each other so much.
Did you find it to be you say refreshing, but was there a kind of my version of that is like I was saying earlier, when I was a teenager and Ram Dass was around, there was a part of it that was terrifying to me. But were you guys, I don't know, were you scared at all? Did you want to run and hide, or did it feel like you were just in the arms of grace and it was all good?
Neither of those things. It was okay. I used to end up. I mean, I'd end up with Krishnadas, and we'd go to the river and bemoan our fate that we were the worst people on earth. How could we be sitting in front of this purity and, having whatever thoughts and whatever. For the most part, there wasn't any of that. When you were actually in that pool, there was no time and space. It was like psychedelic, basically. There wasn't time and space, and there was just this expansive feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
But once you left that, it was, oh my God, the worst. So it was really a combination. But the refreshing part was, okay, we are loved, even though we have this crazy shit going on,
Yeah.
So, hey, I found what I was looking for while we were talking, which, we're at the end of the podcast, but this is what we have been talking about for the last hour with Zach. And this is a quote from Aldous Huxley, which is in your book. The man who comes back through the door in the wall will never be quite the same as the man who went out. He will be wiser, but less sure, happier, but less self-satisfied, humbler in acknowledging his ignorance, yet better equipped to understand the relationship of words to things. I love that.
That's from The Doors of Perception.
Yeah.
1954, way ahead of its time. Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, we owe a lot to Aldous Huxley. I mean, he was so important when I was, a teenager and getting into all of this stuff. So
without Aldous, there would have been no Timothy or Richard. He set the table for them.
Get them to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Let's start there, right?
Right.
Oh, boy. Hey, this has been great. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks, man.
And we got to spend this time.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You're going to send me a couple of links that we can get up in the show notes, right? To that talk in particular.
I will do that.
With Laura and Ramdas, where they read from her book. Okay. And then, we'll link up your book. And people, you're going to have a lot to take a look at through this podcast. Of course, you go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling, and you'll be able to see the show notes and the links and all of it. And then what else we have going on Be Here Now Network, which is a lot, from Krishnamurti to Alan Watts to Ramdas and Krishnadas and Jack and Joseph and Sharon, our dear buddies.
So much good stuff there.
Yeah. So, so we'll see you guys next week. And Zach, thank you.
Thank you, Raghu.